Hey folks, it's me Lucid. I don't normally do these at the beginning of videos, but I would like to just in case if you folks might not stay till the end. As this year is coming to an end, I want to take a moment for each and every one of you for everything. I've been doing this for 7 months and I've had a lot of ups and downs, but everything that's happened is phenomenal. I'm forever grateful, I went into this not really seeing it go anywhere, but the fact that people go out of their way just to listen to my stuff and they actually enjoyed it, it's just phenomenal. I put so much work into these videos and I'm so happy you folks like it. I also wanted to thank my really good friend Jensen. Huge shout out to you, my friend. He really suggested I really get into this again back in April before this whole quarantine hit, and you saw potential in me, and for that, it's inspired and motivated me to create everything and do everything I've done these past months. And it wouldn't be possible without you and all my other amazing friends I've made along this ride. So in small words, thank you. Thank you so much. It means more to me than you guys ever know. And Jensen and all my other amazing friends that I've met day one, if you see this or not, just know that you guys are phenomenal and you mean so much to me. But yeah, on with the story. The story's by Author JoJo. He wrote this phenomenal Thanksgiving story for me and I love it and I can't wait for you guys to hear it. But enough of my talking. Let's get on with the story. My boyfriend and I, Adam, had been dating for quite a while. It was coming up on 2 years, and I hadn't met much of the guy's family yet, though he had met mine. Last year, he came over briefly on Thanksgiving, but had to leave before dinner. Still, it was nice to have him around. I got to show off the man I had been dating who looked like he came right out of a modeling magazine. The jealousy in my sister's eyes was worth its weight in gold. Though after a while, I started to feel like I was some kind of secret, or that there was possibly something wrong with me, that he didn't want his family knowing about me. If he was on the phone with them, I would tell him to say hi for me. He would, but that was about it. So this year, I asked if instead of going to my house, he took me to his. He looked rather flush at the mention. I had clearly taken him off guard, as he immediately broke eye contact. He mentioned that I wouldn't like it where he lived, that it's nothing like the big city we live in now, liking it to more of an off-the-grid lifestyle, where everyone grew their own food and shared to help the community thrive. I told him that it sounded amazing, that a place where people grew and hunted their own food must be great at Thanksgiving. He could feel the enthusiasm in my words and perhaps soften up due to them. "There's not much need for hunting," he said in retort, vaguely mentioning after that it wasn't really up to him anyway. It was his family's decision who came and went. So I pleaded that all he did was ask, that I wouldn't be mad if they said no, but I just wanted to know that he would ask. Looking me over for a few moments, he sheepishly nodded his head in compliance and in return received a kiss on the cheek. The next day I heard him talking on the phone. I wasn't trying to snoop, but it became apparent that he was talking to his mother about me. Even hearing him question about my presence at their family dinner felt validating. Never mind when I heard him say into the receiver, "I'm sure she'll be excited to hear that," followed by, "I suppose she'll find out eventually." I was too focused on the knowledge that nearly after 2 years, I was finally going to meet his family to hear the rest of the conversation. When he told me I could go, I tried my best to act surprised. I didn't have to act out of my confusion when he asked me to promise to not make a scene. He could see the uncertainty on my face and continued, "We do things a little different where I live." It was something I shrugged off, figuring that his family just had some different traditions or something like that. "You can't judge us," he sternly said. Part of the family struck a chord with my heart, and the bubbling confusion I was experiencing started to die down. I nodded my head and promised to be on my best behavior, stating that I wouldn't think anything different about him unless he killed people. This managed to get a chuckle out of him. No, we don't kill anyone, he replied through laughter. A few days went by as I timidly await the day we would head out. I asked if I should cook anything to bring with us, and he replied stating that all the food we would need was already going to be there. Honestly, I just wanted something to keep myself busy as the nerves started to well up inside my stomach. I just had to get to the day. It's like a roller coaster. The hard part is waiting for it to climb the track. After that, you're home free. Finally, I drew my pen through the date on the calendar, marking a line through the letters reading, Thanksgiving. Adam was throwing on his jacket behind me, and before I knew it, we were out the door and in his car. The ride wasn't too long, about 5 hours, and as the miles fell behind us, the scenery became more sprawling and free of human interruption. Before I knew it, all I could see were rolling hills and climbing trees. It was beautiful. It was within an ever-increasingly dense wave of trees that I noticed Adam turning onto a faded dirt path. Thankfully, we left pretty early in preparation for the drive, so it was still bright out. As we dived into the thick woods, beams of light pierced a canopy of trees like knives digging into the soil. I thought briefly that this would be a lovely place to live, and wondered why Adam would have ever left. Maybe it was the ever-decreasing cell service. Did he long for offerings of an ever-advancing world? After a few more minutes of mesmerizing tree lines, Adam pulled the car to the side and parked it between some trees. He turned the car off and told me that we would be walking from there, as his folks didn't like technology reaching into their neighborhood. Despite sounding like something a cult compound would impose, he did warn me, so I wasn't taken aback. We shuffled out into the car, driving into a lush, green forest and soft brown soil. It was all almost too picturesque to be real. Following closely behind Adam, as we walked silently, I kept observing the trees around me, wondering if I would see any wildlife trotting between the small gaps afforded by the trees. It was during that scanning of the forest that I noticed there were other cars parked in between trees, much like our own. I questioned Adam about this. He said that it wasn't like people living there weren't free to leave, but everyone also returned to their families on Thanksgiving so that they could give. He continued that in fact, those who leave the compound are the reason they can continue to give year after year. Despite more prodding, he didn't delve much deeper into what he meant by that, as I felt it was an odd thing to say without providing any context. As I tried one more time to pry a little more, we broke through the trees and were met with a clearing. It was like the trees that were there before were all plucked from the ground, stump and all, and made into the cabins before us. It looked to be about a dozen of amazingly crafted log cabins and a decently sized clearing with trees lining the outside like a fence. I let out a sound of awe, to which Adam replied, "Beautiful, isn't it?" I pictured having a cabin in a place like this, living so close to nature, and living off the land without the hustle of ordinary city life. The idea was intoxicating. As I daydreamed about the isolated life, I looked at the cabins as we were passing by. Whenever I met eyes with one of the people living there, I would flash a quaint smile to them. The way they smiled back and started putting my worries at ease. I thought I had conquered the roller coaster. Something was strange though. My assumption was that there would be land that was converted to a farm of sorts, but no matter where I looked, all I saw was undisturbed, green grass. Once again, I brought up the thoughts swimming in my head. Adam simply replied, "There are farms. Every cabin has one." But for the life of me, I couldn't find a trace of them. How odd, I thought. But before it would sink in, I heard a shrill cry ringing out, one that nearly made me leap from my shoes. Twisting my head, I saw an older woman running out and wrapping their arms around Adam, who responded with a hug. It was like every time suspicion arose in my head, something came along to interrupt it. His mother introduced herself to me and ran down a list of names, pointing to the adults on their porches. I saw a few children running around, and as I started to ask what their names were, Adam's mother motioned for me to come inside as she made her way back to the cabin. Entering the cabin felt like transporting to the past. The way rustic cooking ware hung on the walls, the floor was lined with faded rugs that held furniture with imperfections that informed you they were made by hand. A small fire pouring a comforting heating into the cabin light, solely by candlelight, and small peeks of the sun through the window. Once again, I was in awe. Adam leaned over to my ear and reminded me of my promise to not judge. I laughed and assured him he was worrying for nothing. He offered an uncertain glance before electing to give me a tour. We walked from room to room, observing the various knickknacks that lined the walls. He showed me his old room, where we would be staying. I was surprised to find it barren, other than the bed in the middle of the room. He answered the question before I could speak it, telling me that if a kid grows up around here, then they could decorate their room. But Adam likes the simplicity, so he just left it like that, preferring to play outside anyway. As promised, I had no intention of judging, but it was interesting to get a deeper look at his life. As we walked back to the main room, I took another look at the cookware hanging on the walls and couldn't help but notice something wasn't adding up. It was getting pretty late at this point. Barely any light slipped through the windows, but I hadn't sensed any telltale signs of cooking food. No aroma or gatherings in the kitchen. All that was on the large wooden table in the dining room was a wooden plate sitting in front of each other. I worried that food was going to take a while, and my stomach retorted with a pain growl. Adam heard the rumbling and said to me that food would be arriving shortly. Arriving, I thought, was a weird word for it, but he did mention that all the neighbors helped each other out. Suddenly, snapping back to a previous thought, I looked at Adam and asked where his farm was, bringing up that he said each cabin had one. His mother must have overheard me. "This year was rough for us, darling," she said from the doorway that connected to the kitchen and the dining room. "Our farm was barren," she said with a grim expression that lifted into a smile. "Perhaps you can help us next year." I smiled at the offer, taking it as a sign that she had warmed up to me in some capacity. I told her I would love nothing more. To this, she offered Adam a quick wink and a smile. "She likes you," he said before heading over to the dinner table. "Sit now. The others will be arriving soon with dinner." I walked over as instructed and sat down on the chair, feeling the craftsmanship wane under me, feeling my fingers running over the wood, feeling the spots where over time splinters would form, raised a curiosity. Once again, Adam was one step ahead. My father made all of this. I looked over to meet his gaze, realizing I had never heard him speak of his father before. He passed away a few years ago. I bit my lip. I could feel a wave of his sorrow breaking against the shores of my skin. I said I was sorry, as genuinely as I could. "It's okay. It's been a few years, but it's why the farm is barren," he continued, and turned his head to the kitchen, where his mom was running the faucet. "I think I gotta step up and help out around here more often." Despite the few troubles that tickled the back of my head, I wasn't at all against the idea of going there more often. I told Adam that we totally should, and that I would be more than happy to help however I could. The waves that washed over my skin received as he gave me a smile that made my heart melt. As I stared into his eyes, I noticed a sheen, like a thin film had been resting over them, and that his skin was becoming pale. Asking if he was alright caused a voice from behind me to inform me that Adam was just hungry is all. I turned around to see a taller gentleman walking into the house with a few other people in the ever-growing darkness behind him. In the man's hands was a large wooden box that he waltzed over with and sat directly in the middle of the table. Adam followed the box with his eyes, looking at it eagerly like he couldn't wait to get at whatever was inside. Truth be told, I felt the same, stomach growing ever irritable. The others entered the cabin and began to set themselves at the table. Some of them brought similar or smaller boxes that were placed in front of us. It looked like a children's birthday party, the way the wooden boxes were all sitting stacked around each other. The mother returned from the kitchen and sat at the head of the table. Just like my family did, everyone joined hands and Adam's mother began to pray. It was a prayer I hadn't even heard before, something that felt like they were praying more to the forest around us than any kind of god. Our hands released from each other and the people started reaching towards the boxes. Before I followed suit, I took a look at the table and couldn't help but notice that I was only sitting with adults. The filter I was trying so hard to maintain failed me as I asked the adults at the table where the kids were. Everyone seemed to stop in place. They didn't turn their attention to me or anything. It was like someone had taken a picture and they were stuck where they were. A moment of awkward silence went by when I heard the loud laughter of children running around the house. Relief washed over me as the giggling circled the cabin before disappearing into the distance. Though I didn't understand why they weren't in the cabin to eat with us. "We need to eat," Adam spoke firmly, and everyone started moving again. They seemed unsettled, like they were in a hurry. Some of them began lifting the tops of the boxes, while others stuck their hands in and pulled out hunks of meat. They looked cooked, a black char running along the outside, like they had been quickly thrown on something hot before being removed too quickly. The meat on the inside was red, and I initially took it as beef, though the blood that still slipped from the faded red flesh made me feel a little ill, and seeing that the fat of the meat held a yellow tinge, I worried I wouldn't be able to eat. Everyone else, though, ate fine. Adam next to me put a portion of meat in his mouth and clamped down. I could almost hear the meat squishing between his teeth. I could see the faint trails of blood mixed with saliva running out of his mouth and down his chin. They all just ate with their hands, pulling the meat apart with their teeth like animals, like they didn't have any time to waste. I stood up from my seat. This shot me a quick and stern glance from Adam. I reassured him I was just going to go outside to get some fresh air, that all the smog from the city must still be sitting in my lungs. I continued that I would just go play with the kids and be right back when I feel a little better. Starting to walk away, I felt soggy fingers wrap around my wrist. They were so slimy that I could easily slip away, but they were Adam's, so I stopped and returned his gaze. "There are no children out there," he said. His words spilled out through teeth plagued with bits of meat. I told him not to be silly, that I heard them playing just a moment ago. He repeated, "There are no children out there." The room was deathly silent. I was hoping to hear the children running around again, but there was no such comfort. I told Adam that I know I saw kids there, and that if they weren't outside, I'd like to know where they were. Adam loosened his grip and sat back in his chair, turning his head to look forward. I knew I promised not to make a scene, but I had so many questions and I needed answers. I was going to raise my voice, demand to know what was going on. But Adam had already answered my question. He wasn't looking away from me to disengage. He was looking away to reply. He was looking straight ahead. His answer was in front of him. The wooden boxes that everyone brought in. In disbelief, I muttered my denial. No, there's no way. My words stuttered as I backed away from the table, suddenly feeling all their gazes. Running through everything I had seen and heard, trying to piece it all together. Adam said that if kids grew up here, he said that every cabin has a farm. His mother neglected to tell me the children's names because they didn't have any. They were given. I stared, eyes wide at the people who were just previously stuffing their faces with those children. Hunks of meat burnt and hastily chopped up, stuffed into wooden boxes like transportable coffins. Bile started rising in my chest, the urge to throw up increasing as I envisioned their gnashing teeth ripping apart the meat, blood spilling out, stringing bits getting wedged in between their teeth. My feet pivoted, and I started running to the door, but Adam screamed for me, something desperate and genuine in his voice. With my hands on the doorknob, I could hear it again, the laughter of children. This time, though, I could hear it. It was children laughing, all right. In fact, it was the same noise I had heard a moment prior. The same exact noise I had heard the kids making when I first saw them, like their excitement was being looped. "You can't go out there until we finish our meal," Adam's mother spoke softly. I looked back at everyone. Their faces had become tender. The people I first assumed to be monsters with large gnashing teeth were broken. Saliva, blood, and tears painted their faces. I asked them what was out there. Why were they doing this? The children are the only way to appease them. We have to devour the flesh, the meat. Adam spoke, struggling to find the right words to explain to me. The kids that die, it takes what they did when they were alive, mimics them. By now, a few people had returned to eating, maybe sensing that I wasn't going to leave. There's so many. But if we offer more each year, they don't leave this area. He spoke. He was shaky, like we were on the verge of breaking up or something. Adam's father died, and so their farm became barren, but the farms were women. I looked back to Adam and asked what happens if it leaves the forest. He shrugged, unable to give an answer, to which I retorted that what if nothing bad were to happen? Adam rose from his seat, candlelight hiding half of his features. He walked over to me and wrapped a much drier hand around mine. Following him, he guided me to a nearby wall. I hadn't noticed before, but the wall had another piece of wood covering it. A piece of wood that Adam pulled back, revealing a larger window. Looking out at the forest, it was dark, but I could see what he wanted me to see. The figures, all of them standing at the edge of the forest. I could see silver orbs floating by the trees, looking like a line of miniature moons. All those eyes watching us. The more I looked, the more my eyes adjusted to the darkness. The more I could make out about the children, the way their skin was split open, bones rising out at odd angles, causing their faces to twist into bizarre shapes. Their arms were all bent back and hanging over their shoulders like backpack straps, bones sticking out from elbows, creating an image of antlers shining against the moonlight. Their legs, I could see the skin twisted, so their toes faced behind them, and their knees bent, reminded me of the wildlife I expected to be in the forest. They watched as I heard the men and women behind us eating their share. Everyone has to eat, Adam said, looking towards me. I could feel his eyes as I looked into the distance. Anyone who doesn't eat, they take. I heard the giggling again, the playful laughter of children. They were so far away, but the noises sounded like it was right on the other side of the glass. The clearing, however, suddenly felt as though it was alive, like it was a stomach of some sort, rumbling to be fed. It was hard to pull myself away from watching the tree line, from looking at the grotesque and twisted children, trying to count them all, trying to figure out how long this had been going on. It was only when the children started walking away from the tree line that I pulled myself away. They all moved so perfectly together, an ever-closing ring. I'm ashamed to say I wasn't taken that night, that while I sat at that table, I felt the squish of meat fumble over my teeth. I wish I could say I would be brave enough to take my chances. But ultimately, I was able to understand Adam. I was able to understand why he rushed home that last Thanksgiving, to understand the rest of the people in that little clearing. But when I think of whatever that horde of mock children would do if they should ever creep into the nearest town, I could finally understand what it truly meant. To give thanks.